You asked for a raise. Your manager said the budget was tight. You said you understood. You went back to your desk. You kept working. 3 months later, a new hire started in a role similar to yours. You found out what they were earning. It was more than you. You had been there for 3 years. The reason was not that the money wasn't there. The reason is that your manager was sitting across from you with information about your salary that you have never been given. And that information is the entire negotiation. By the end of this video, you are going to understand the exact data your employer holds going into every salary conversation. And once you see what that data is, you will never hear the phrase, "the budget is tight," the same way again. Here is what your manager knows before you open your mouth. They know the salary band for your role. Every organization that employs more than a small number of people runs on salary bands, a defined floor and ceiling for what each position is permitted to pay. Your manager knows where your current salary sits inside that band. They know whether you're at the floor, the midpoint, or approaching the ceiling. They know exactly how much room technically exists to move your number upward. You have never seen this document. Picture a colleague, competent, 5 years at the company, good record. She sits down to ask for a raise. She thinks the number she's about to say is ambitious but reasonable. Her manager already knows that number sits $3,000 below the midpoint of the band. The conversation proceeds as though it is a negotiation. It is not a negotiation. It is a managed disclosure of a decision that was already within reach. When you ask for a raise, you are estimating. When they respond, they already know whether your number is above or below the ceiling. They know whether movement is technically possible, regardless of what they say about the budget. You are conducting a negotiation without the only document that defines the terms. Here is the second piece of information your manager is holding: internal equity data. That is the term organizations use for what their own employees currently earn. Your manager can see within a defined range what people at your level and in your function are paid across the organization. When they tell you there is no room to move your salary, they already know whether you are sitting at the floor, the middle, or near the ceiling of what equivalent colleagues earn. They know whether the number you are asking for would place you above, below, or in line with your peers. You do not have this picture. You have a feeling, and a feeling across the table from a spreadsheet has a predictable result. Now here is the piece most people never think about. Your employer is not only tracking what you currently earn, they are tracking what it would cost to replace you. This is a number they have already calculated. Recruiting costs, agency fees, time to fill, onboarding weeks, and the months of reduced output while a new hire reaches full productivity. The total cost to replace a mid-level professional sits between 50 and 200% of annual salary. Your manager knows this figure. When they sit across from you in a salary conversation, what they are calculating is not whether the organization can afford a raise. They are calculating whether you are likely to leave if they say no. If the answer is no, if everything about your pattern signals you will stay, the raise does not need to happen. Not because the money isn't there, because the calculation says the risk of not giving it is low. Here is the part nobody warns you about. The annual performance review is not a salary negotiation. It is an anchoring mechanism. When your manager opens the conversation by telling you the organization gives between 3 and 5% this cycle, that range is not a reflection of what your work was worth. It is a reference point, placed there to move the entire conversation inside a band that was set before you entered the room. You walked in thinking about your contributions. The quarter you delivered above target, the project that was failing until you steadied it, the Saturday you came in when nobody asked you to. Your manager walked in with a number and a range. Your role in that conversation was to move them from 3% to 4.5%. You were not negotiating your salary. You were negotiating the increment on a baseline you never set, never saw, and never agreed to. This is how most of your career's salary growth has been calculated. Here is the mechanism that changes the entire calculation, and it is not what most people expect. When your manager tells you there is no budget, they are not delivering financial information. They are running a test. The test has one question: do you know what the market would currently pay you? If you accept the answer and return to your desk, the result is recorded. You don't know. And if you don't know, there is no cost to leaving your salary exactly where it is. Think about the last 3 times you were told the budget was tight. In every case, the conversation ended when you accepted the response. Nothing about the organization's finances changed in the days that followed. The calculation simply confirmed that it did not need to. The salary conversation is an information contest. Your manager entered it knowing your band, your position within it, what your peers earn, and what you would cost to replace. You entered it with a sense of what you feel you deserve. That is not a level exchange. You did everything right. You delivered on every target that was placed in front of you. You stayed when the 2 colleagues you respected most decided to leave. You took on the extra work without being asked twice. You made your case thoughtfully at the right moment with measured language. And the system responded the way it was designed to respond. Not to your contribution, to your information position. You were not playing it wrong. You were playing it honestly against a party that was playing it with the full ledger. That is not a personal failure. That is what happens when one side of any negotiation has complete data and the other side has a feeling. Here is what actually governs salary outcomes. Not tenure, not loyalty, not the score on your annual review. What governs salary outcomes is the cost of keeping you relative to the cost of losing you. When that calculation shifts because you hold an external offer, because your behavior signals you know your market value, because the organization can no longer predict your next move with confidence, the budget becomes available. You have already watched this happen. The colleague who handed in their notice was counter-offered within a week. The week before, the budget had been tight. Nothing changed in the organization's finances between Monday and Friday. What changed was one number in the calculation. There is one final thing worth stating plainly. The largest salary increases in most professional careers do not come from asking better. They come from leaving, or from making it credible that leaving is a real option. The salary conversation was never about your performance score. It was never about how long you had stayed. It was never about what you deserved. It was always about information. Who had it, who didn't, and what each side calculated the other would do next. Now you have the document they never handed you. That is corporate GPS, the map they never handed you.